I'm gonna rely on you. Pull that up and then run through, just change slides as he requests it. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, the version I just sent.
Yeah.
I think I sent it earlier. When we sent it an hour before.
Oh yeah, no, it's
I
fine.
missed the deadline, so I sent it.
No, it's fine. When you need to change slides, just let Jennifer know and she'll flip through.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1:30, so we'll get going here. So yeah, with time being 1:30, I'll call the STRGBA GSA meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Here in the room, member agencies. So I'm Eric Thorburn with Oakdale Irrigation District. Got Mike Pitcock here from the city of Waterford. Let's see, we've got Miguel here from the city of Modesto. John is here from MID, taking Jesse's place currently as the alternate, and then Christy McKinnon's here as well. So we have a quorum on the phone here. Let's see, you've got Henderson Hatfield. I'm assuming that is Stacy. And then we've got Hillary. Juan is on the phone, Juan Ochoa. Kelly Doyle. Looks like Bill Lyons is with us, and then we've got another number, not sure who that is. They want to speak up and introduce themselves, they can add their name to the minutes, otherwise they can stay anonymous, I guess, if they'd like. So first order of business, as usual, is business from the public. So interested persons are welcome to introduce any topic within the agency's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the agency at this meeting. So we'll open it up for open up to public business from the public. Okay, see no hands raised, hearing nothing. We'll move on to item number 3. So this is the requesting approval of the June 14th, 2023 meeting minutes. Assuming everybody has had an opportunity to review those, I'll entertain a motion. Thanks, Mike. Second, Miguel. Any comments on the minutes from the member agencies? Okay, hearing none. Any comments from the public? Seeing no hands, hearing none. We'll go to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 4, this is the 2023 operating budget update. So the updated budget is attached as an agenda item. It reflects the comments and discussion that we had at the last meeting. Any questions from member agencies? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion on that as well. So this would be, the total is $216,500 for the year. That'll be split 8 ways. So with the 8th being Tuolumne County GSA. Comments, questions? No. Okay, we'll open up to the public on the 2023 operating budget. Questions, comments on that? Okay, hearing none, seeing no hands raised. I'll entertain a motion. Should have done that first. A motion to approve. Motion by Miguel. Do I have a second? Second by John. Thank you. Already went out for comments from the public. Already had an opportunity for comments, questions from the agencies. So we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Very good. Thank you. Okay. Topic number 5, update on the RFQ process for consultant services for the GSP and groundwater annual reports for the next 4 years. Something like that for the next several years.
Next 6 years annual reports and 1 GSP.
6. Okay.
Next 6 years for annual reports and 1 GSP update. The update right now is currently we have our committee members reviewing RFPs. We've collected 3 so far and 4 pending. As soon as we collect all the rating sheets from the member agencies, we'll consolidate them and then discuss the selection of consultant, and then move forward with a City of Modesto committee meeting for approving to go to council, and then we'll go to council. Timeline there We're looking at going to committee in October and to council in November. And hopefully have a contract signed with the consultant sometime in November to initiate the next annual report.
Perfect. Sounds good. Looking forward to hearing what the scores are and moving forward the process. So questions, comments on that from the member agencies? No? Just noise. Okay, any questions, comments from the public on that? On the RFP, RFQ process and status? All right, moving right along. Number 6. So item number 6 is a presentation by Todd Groundwater on the draft monitoring well installation plan, and Arden Wells has joined us on the phone to help us out with that.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Are y'all able to see? Let me pull up. Okay, can y'all see the full presentation?
Yes,
Okay, is it in presenter mode or is it the full screen showing?
we can see the next slide on the right. I'm not sure what mode is that.
Let's try this.
There we go. Full
Okay,
screen.
excellent. Thank
Better.
you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. My name is Arden Wells. I'm with Todd Groundwater. I want to recognize that for this draft monitoring well installation plan that Liz and Brent did most of the heavy lifting for it, but Liz is currently traveling and Brent's on a well-deserved vacation. So I was sent to present it to all y'all. Yeah, I'll just walk through it. And then at the end, please let me know if there are any questions and I'll do my best to answer them. So we were asked to prepare a draft monitoring plan, really to identify data gaps in the monitoring network and identify the locations and proposed well constructions of wells that would fill those data gaps. So when we think about the monitoring networks, we kind of think of them in 2 groups. The first are the wells that are for the chronic lowering of groundwater levels. And the areas with the main data gaps for these wells are within the western lower principal aquifer and also within the eastern principal aquifer. The second group of wells are the interconnected surface water wells. And so these are shallow wells that are along the river boundaries of all 3 rivers in the area, the Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and the San Joaquin rivers. So this plan that we prepared includes 33 monitoring wells at 28 locations. So in some of the locations, there are 2 wells, which are paired wells for the western lower principal aquifer, and then a shallower well for the western upper principal aquifer. And while there are quite a few more wells in the western upper principal aquifer than the western lower principal aquifer, when we're putting the deeper wells in an area to examine the lower principal aquifer, it's extremely beneficial to have a paired shallower well to look at the conditions above the Corcoran clay and understand what's going on at a given location in both aquifers. And so in developing this plan, we divided the monitoring wells into 3 tiers, which are based on priority. And in the next slide, I'll be sharing a little bit more about what those tiers are and why the wells are in the different tiers. And then finally, before I dive into it, I want to just note that these locations are conceptual. So we looked at where the data gaps are, but we didn't identify specific sites. So we didn't necessarily look at where member agencies have property where we could strategically or easily put a well, or where there is room to be able to easily drill a well. We just focused on what are the locations that have the biggest need for having monitoring data. So in this, we developed the monitoring well tiers. And this was just because we recognized that 33 monitoring wells, that's a lot of wells, that's a lot of money and a lot of time to construct them. So we wanted to break it down into different levels where we could identify what we want to prioritize. So tier number 1 are the highest priority wells. And really the goal of these are to fill the areas in the western lower principal aquifer and the eastern principal aquifer that don't have any monitoring wells in the vicinity. So when we're thinking about the overall groundwater levels, we just really don't quite know exactly what's going on in these areas. And for each of the wells in tier 1 for the western lower principal aquifer, we're also proposing as a tier 1 well to have a paired well that's going to be on the same property, but shallower and monitoring water levels in the western upper principal aquifer. Next, we have tier 2, and the goal of these wells are to fill gaps in the interconnected surface water monitoring network. So these are the wells that are along the rivers and pretty shallow to monitor the surface water groundwater interactions. And then finally, there are the tier 3 wells, which of these are the lowest priority wells. So in tier 1, we would have identified the wells that are in locations that don't have any wells. And then for tier 3, we go back in and look at the gaps that exist between existing wells. So they're not necessarily areas that don't have any wells, but they're the areas between existing wells where we're having to interpolate a little, and the monitoring network could be improved by having data in these zones. So next I'm going to dive into the maps by each aquifer. This map is showing the existing wells and the proposed wells in the western lower principal aquifer. So the proposed wells are shown in the big blue dots. And the tier 1 wells, the highest priority wells, are shown as big blue dots. And these are in the westernmost part of the western lower principal aquifer. You can see in this area, there are very few existing wells, and this represents a significant data gap in our understanding of the aquifer conditions in the western lower principal aquifer. There's one well shown in a big blue square that is a tier 3 well. So this is the well that it's near some existing wells, but there's a good bit of uncertainty because it is still an area that doesn't have much, that doesn't have a well telling us what's going on there. This is the western upper principal aquifer. And you can see, especially with the green chasm dots, that there are quite a few existing wells in this area. But each of the wells here corresponds to one of the deeper wells that is much needed for the western lower principal aquifer. So here we have 4 tier 1 wells and shown in the blue dots, and 1 tier 3 well shown with the blue square. These are the wells in the proposed plan in the eastern principal aquifer. And this is more of a mix of tier 1 wells shown in the blue circles and tier 3 wells shown in the blue squares. So there are 5 tier 1 wells, and those are in the easternmost part of the eastern principal aquifer, or at least 4 of them are. One of them is shown kind of in the central area. And then there are 8 tier 3 wells, which are shown as blue squares throughout the area. And then finally, this is the map showing the proposed wells for interconnected surface water for that monitoring network. So these are in the tier 2 category. And as you can see, there are 10 wells, and a lot of them are much closer to the rivers than many of the existing wells in our monitoring network. And there's quite a few stretches, especially along the Stanislaus and San Joaquin rivers, where we really just don't currently have much information about the groundwater conditions here. So these wells would serve to help inform us about groundwater surface water interactions to better monitor the interconnected surface water. So finally, for each of these wells, we created the proposed well construction. And this was using the information about the Corcoran clay as applicable or the depth to water in each conceptual well location. So for the wells in the western upper principal aquifer, we put the screens 20 feet above the top of the Corcoran clay, based off of the models that exist for the extent of the and depth of the Corcoran clay. And then for the paired western lower principal aquifer wells, we propose putting the screens 50 feet below the bottom of the Corcoran clay. For the eastern principal aquifer wells, we propose putting the screen either 100 feet below the 2015 depth to water, or for the wells that have recent minimum depths or maximum depths, then putting that 100 feet below the 2023 depth to water value in the easternmost part of the subbasin. And it's also just worth noting this is based off of the conceptual locations. It's possible that, you know, when we really dig into the details, when it comes time to place some of these wells, we may have more information directly near where we really want to put the wells. And so these proposed construction depths may change. And also some of this will be dependent upon what is found when the wells are drilled, especially in regards to the depth of the Corcoran clay, and wanting to make sure that the western upper principal aquifers are above the Corcoran clay, and then the wells monitoring the western lower principal aquifer is below the Corcoran clay. And so that is the extent of what I have for y'all today, but I'd love to answer any questions or provide any more insight that may be useful. Thank y'all.
I have a question.
Yep.
Why does it appear that there's more spatial representation in the network on the western side than the eastern? Does that have to do with the risk to subsidence?
Can you do me a favor and pop? I think the button on yours needs to be up. There you go. Yep,
Hello, sorry about that.
no problem.
Why does it appear that there's more spatial representation on the western side than the eastern side? With the proposed monitoring network and filling the data gaps?
So is the question why there are fewer existing wells on the western side versus the eastern side?
No, why will there be more wells in the western area of the subbasin than the eastern after the data gaps are addressed?
I think overall, I don't know the total amount of wells on each side after the data gaps are addressed.
I think the answer to that, I'll try to help you out
Okay.
here. So I think the answer to that is that we have, you know, in the non-district east area and in the east, there are fewer wells existing. So I think the spacing generally is pretty consistent with what they're, if you look in the non-district east, that the spacing of the new wells is kind of consistent with that. And on the west, you have the cities where you have a lot more wells available to already that are existing to monitor. These will be dedicated monitoring wells. So if you look at, for example, on if you go to the western upper principal aquifer there, CMS MW4S there is surrounded by 3 other wells, but they're not dedicated monitoring wells. So I had a similar question during our planning meeting, and that was the answers that they wanted to have a dedicated monitoring well there, and it would be 2. That would be a site where you'd have 2 as well, upper and lower. So does that answer your question?
Yes, that makes
Okay.
sense. Thanks.
Any other questions? From the member agencies? Okay, we'll go out to the public. So it's going to go with the top down here on the list I'm seeing here. So Stacy, you have a question for us? Question, comment?
Hi, thank you. Just a couple of questions. I don't think I saw cost in there. I hope I didn't miss it, but did you guys already come up with the costs for these wells?
No, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just, I think, going to answer the same thing. No, we haven't yet come up with the costs for this. This was just focused on identifying the data gaps and areas with biggest need for wells.
Yep. And I'll add to that a little bit too. So she started off by saying a little bit too, that we really haven't designated exact locations. This is kind of a proximity. And so this plan is going to help us when we do have funding available to be ready to hit the ground running. We do generally know what these wells cost because of the grant that the city of Modesto got facilitated and has now been completed, where we put in a number of monitoring wells already. But some of that cost is definitely going to be dependent on the location, whether we go on the county road right away and we don't have to pick up any additional property, or whether we go on private property and have to pick up easements or acquire actual footprints for that monitoring well. So no, the short answer is we don't have costs yet. And in the budget, the last item, you'll notice we don't have any funding or money set aside to get these wells done currently. But if a grant does come up, we do have funds to available in a budget, set aside the budget for grant writing if something, some opportunity were to arise to allow us to move forward more quickly.
Okay, and then do you guys have any plans for, let's just say there is a cost that isn't covered by grants. Do you have a plan for how to allocate these costs among the different member agencies or the different management zones?
We haven't gotten that far yet, so we would have to talk about it at that point. We might
All right,
may
so with-
take the same
go ahead.
structures we're taking now and divide it equally, or it may benefit one party more than the other. So we would really have to have that discussion when we got to that point.
All right, so would that be a discussion that would take place at a public meeting so that those of us who have an opinion about that can speak to it if that condition arises?
Yeah, I would envision it occurring at a public meeting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Lyons, you have a question or a comment for us? You're looks like you're on mute still.
Am I okay now?
There we go. Yep.
I apologize. You're dealing with someone that's almost computer illiterate, so
No problem.
at least I feel good, Eric, that you didn't mute me, right? Hardin, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Bill Lyons. Our family farms in the western edge of the district of Modesto Irrigation District. We're actually celebrating our 100th year in business this year. What I'd like to ask you is Todd Groundwater, do they know, or do you know about the extensive amount of work that our ranch has done out here that I believe that we've sent you reports on the depths of water and kind of the water tables and everything out here? Are you aware of that?
I am not sure if I have worked with the data that you've sent over. What is the name of your ranch?
Name of our ranch is Mapes Ranch.
Okay,
And-
yes, I know we have received a lot of data from y'all. And
Right,
we very
so-
much appreciate that.
Well, and that's going to lead me to my next kind of question. You know, a lot of that, well, not a lot of it, all of it's been accumulated by third-party consultants. So there's some pretty valuable data, and we've been, in my opinion, very forthcoming to the public about that. And it kind of leads to my question is, you know, since I followed the sub-basin and have kind of watched it, mature, you know, it's come to our attention and many other people's attention that there's not a lot of data on the east side of the sub-basin. And there hasn't been maybe quite the release of private information to the sub-basin. And I'm wondering why, you know, you would put so many wells on the western end of the Modesto Irrigation District when there appears to be a lot of data available that shows a very sustainable, aquifer, and not up into the western region where, based on what we've been told, that there's a 40 to 45,000 acre foot deficit a year. So if you could maybe explain that to me, I'd sure like to hear the rationale.
Well, I don't know the history of how all of the western lower principal aquifer wells were selected in the original GSP. I wasn't active in that, but I definitely will pass on that there is existing data. I know, you know, if there are wells that can easily be incorporated into the monitoring network and regularly monitored in a way that, you know, helps be conservative with the budget. I imagine that, you know, it would be possible to incorporate them, but I don't know the full history of how all of the wells have been selected, but it's great to know that there are wells.
No,
that are being monitored.
And I appreciate that dialogue. I just think that I'm sure that there'll be other Western District landowners that when they become aware of this, they would rather see the money spent. You're lucky enough to receive grant money on areas that there's very, very little data. The other thing I was just going to mention that if you could flip to your interconnected west map, where it shows the interconnected surface water monitoring network. Okay, great, thank you. I believe.
Sorry about that. There we go.
Right, the map. And like I say, we've been out here for 100 years. I haven't been here 100 years, but the MW19, MW20, and MW21 are literally in the floodway of the rivers. So I'm not sure, one, the practicality of putting them there in those illustrative locations, or the ability to actually read them during a number of the periods of years. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. Also, at least one of those locations, maybe two of them, are located on U.S. Fish and Wildlife National Wildlife Refuge lands. And I'm not sure what the process that might be entailed to get a monitoring well located, operational, and permission to read the data from U.S. Fish and Wildlife lands would be. So just to bring that to your attention.
Thank you.
Okay. Otherwise, and I don't know, Eric, if you had the the pleasure to watch the MID meeting yesterday, but there was a lot of comments from MID. I may paraphrase it here, and I know you have an MID representative there, but there appeared to me, and I think a number of other farmers, that there were a lot of issues in monitoring and controls and verification that were basically thrown onto the sub-basin, that was going to be their responsibility. And in the future, I know myself and a lot of MID irrigators want to know, and Eric, maybe this is more your question that probably can't be answered today, but who's going to actually verify whether programs work? Who's going to actually verify the ground to depth water? Who's going to verify those things? Because it appeared that the individual district was leaning heavily, I'm going to underline appeared that they were relying very heavily on whatever the sub-basin's final rules and regulations and monitoring requirements and verification requirements were going to be. So I just wanted to bring that up to let you know what appeared to be what was going to be something that was going to be left up to the sub-basin to handle. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Love the slides. Good to meet you, Adrian, and look forward to working with Todd Groundwater. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback and those comments, Mr. Lyons. We'll look at the floodplain wells. Go back to just to elaborate on what Art said. So if you look at the western lower principal aquifer, that slide, really the basis for those 4 wells there, really 5, and you can see the 5th one is a tier 3, so lowest priority. It's just the spatial is really based on spatial representation and getting that information. And these are representative monitoring wells that we're using in our plan to report back to the state. So we have to get the water levels in these wells twice a year. Once is what we're currently how we're stating in our current plan, at least. So once in fall, once in spring, and a lot of this is stuff you probably already know, but I'm just gonna err on the side of caution and assume that you may not. So really the western lower principal aquifer, this is what dictated those 4 wells in those locations and why they're tier 1, because we really want to have a good spatial representation in what we're reporting back to the state. There are ag wells out there, and we would be happy if you or anyone else out there would be willing to allow us to utilize your private well as a representative monitoring well. But if you don't, just like the people in the non-district east, a lot of them have not been willing, at least up to this point, to provide that data and those wells as a representative monitoring well to conform with the state's requirements and the state's desire to have good monitoring across the basin. Those would be required to fill that data gap. So it's really a data gap analysis thing. If you're looking at the western upper principal aquifer, that's where you start seeing a lot of density in the wells in the west for the representative monitoring wells that we have. But those are just the same sites, and you may have caught that as well. Arden mentioned that those are the same sites. It's just that we're putting 2 wells at one site, so one in the lower aquifer, one in the upper, and the upper aquifer, and one in the lower aquifer. So it just is redundancy and taking advantage of having a dedicated monitoring well that's not being used for irrigation and other purposes, domestic purposes, so that we get a good gauge on what the water levels are doing throughout the year. The last question you had and point you made there about understanding the success of projects in the eastern side of the basin, that's a good point as well. One thing I'll draw your attention to is so if we go to the eastern principal aquifer well exhibit there, you can see where the wells are proposed. There's a lot of them in that non-district east area, and even just in the east side of even OID's districts area, but definitely outside of MID's area and farther to the east. That's where we're really seeing the influence of that overdraft, that 40 to 45,000 acre feet a year that you're talking about. When the city of Modesto went out for a grant recently, not too long ago, we had wells that were these dedicated monitoring wells that were installed at that time. Those are all those red dots there. So if you look to the east in that non-district east, kind of halfway down, MW10, MW7, and MW8. So those are helping significantly with collecting data in the non-district east. Those were installed as part of that Modesto project. The Paul Cell lateral expansion project, for example, that MW7 is essentially right at the Paul Cell lateral. And then the MW8, that's east of it, MW10 is west of it. So we will get a good gauge for the success of that project, for example, through those wells. And hopefully those in the meantime, although we have our goal is to close some of those gaps and get more data out there in that non-district east, those are going to help us significantly with understanding what kind of cause and effects and success we're having with these east side projects, such as the MID out of district proposed project. And actually, I think that was approved yesterday, if I recall correctly, if I heard correctly. I didn't get a chance to attend that meeting, but and OID's out of district program, the 10-year program. So hopefully that helps answer your question a little bit too.
No, Eric, that was a very good explanation, and I I would encourage, you know, the sub-basin, now that there's actually a eastern, I don't know, what's it called? Eastern Stanislaus Mutual Water District. It's been formed out there with 7 or 8 landowners. It appears to be very well organized, representing 12,000 acres. That you know, was a major proponent of the transfer of water yesterday. That I would believe that that would be a excellent conduit to see if those landowners, since they appear to be, you know, that area appears to be the problem for the whole sub-basin, that they would be approached, and hopefully they would be very helpful on securing areas voluntarily that monitoring wells could be put in. But I love your response, Eric, and I want to compliment both you know, the sub-basin and Todd groundwater. Just as somebody that's traveled up and down the state, seen a lot of sub-basins and a lot of Sigma issues. I think you're doing a pretty good job, and I look forward to getting to that point where you receive a blessing from the state. So keep up the good work, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'd like to add one additional point about
Yep.
the western lower principal aquifer wells. One of the challenges to adding wells to this monitoring network that aren't specifically drilled as monitoring wells is that the whole screened area needs to be lower than the Corcoran clay. And so we tend to see a lot more western upper principal aquifer wells, just because there are more wells that are fully above the Corcoran clay than wells that are only lower than the Corcoran clay and have the completion reports to prove it, because a lot get lost along the way. And there's a lot of wells that are screened both above and below the Corcoran clay, which unfortunately means that they can't be used as a principal aquifer monitoring well for either aquifer, because there's some ambiguity about which aquifer it's measuring.
Great point. Thank you. Okay, we've still got a hand raised. One more here from John Herrick. John? You're on. There we go.
Hi, Arden. Thanks for the presentation, and I appreciate the response to Mr. Lyon's questions as well. That was really valuable. I just wanted to know, in terms of as a member of the public, should I send comments on the proposed monitoring wells to the GSA and to Todd, or should they be sent to just one or the other?
Either one is fine. Yeah, either one is fine. We'll make sure it gets to where it needs to be.
And is there a reasonable window that you would like comments?
So I'd say in the next 2 weeks would be great if you could do it. But there's no. This is something that's we're gonna kind of keep on the shelf for a while. So it's really not a huge rush. If you want to, anytime you would like to provide a comment on it is fine. Sooner the better, but anytime is fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yep.
I appreciate the presentation today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Arden. Are there any other questions, comments? Excellent. Well, nice job. Thank you very much, Arden.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 7. This is the Valley Water Collaborative and Nitrate Control Program update, and Perry is here to help us out. If you don't mind, you can actually jump up to the, I think because the mics are right there. We usually have a mic moving around, but it's probably easier for you. I can make that work if it's easier to see, though. It's up to you.
Oh, okay, yeah, I can. Slides.
Want to just speaking with Mike, we'll make sure they can hear you. Okay.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. We'll go ahead and load up the slide deck there. Good.
Can everybody hear Perry? Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think I'm kind of nervous with John Herrick on there. I haven't seen John for a long time. John, he doesn't work now. Doesn't work anymore? He didn't work any less. How are you, John? If it's the same John here, I knew the Delta, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, well, you're moving to slide number 1. Predating you, Eric, in 2020, Valley Water Collaborative was formed in 2019, and shortly after our formation, we began doing our outreach and communication with the GSAs that are encompassed by the Modesto Interlock GSA, Modesto Interlock Basin GSAs. And we had our attorney create a document, document that I didn't have included today because I wanted to have this presentation first to see if we want to proceed. Look at the exact name of the document. And Eric, I just forwarded it to you in case you can have it handy, but a coordination agreement. So in the nitrate control program, and I think you need to enable editing first, that first slide.
Jennifer, are you able to enable editing there and then click onto the first slide for us?
Okay, I'm on the nitrate control program slide.
Yeah, we're seeing all the slides in the same screen here.
Oh. Okay, give me 1 second.
Yes, when we were creating our organization and submitting our preliminary management zone proposal,
There we go. Thank you.
we had a pre-built regulation, of course, and one of those components, it's going to be requiring coordination between our management zones and the GSAs. When we created a draft document, you all were quite busy creating your own plans at that moment and asked that we delay it for a while. And I will come back to that, but it's a coordination overview agreement, and I'm hoping that we can have you all participate in because it's going to be a mutual benefit with several of our goals of our program. And the shorthand, if you haven't heard of the nitrate control program, is that industry went to the regional water board about 10 years ago, realizing that the discharges from agriculture, dairy, including dairy, cities, wastewater treatment plants, food processors, wineries were not able, and not in any short-term period, able to meet the nitrate drinking water standard. Especially as we apply fertilizers, or our corrals and dairy waste processes can lead to leaching of nitrate into groundwater. We were breaking a law, if you will, that said you cannot cause or contribute to contamination of groundwater with any of the inputs that you use. So realizing that if using the tools that the regional board have, which is cease and desist orders or cleanup and abatement orders, would put us out of business, essentially, we have been able to negotiate with the regional board a delay of all of our industries meeting this standard of 35 years. And so when a plan I'll talk about later is approved, the clock will start ticking for 35 years to meet the drinking water standard in our discharges. In exchange for getting that 35 years, all of us in the industry, all of industry representatives agreed and has been put into a basin plan that we will monitor domestic wells, and any wells impacted by nitrate, we will provide them free bottled water and eventually long-term solutions. So at the same time as we do this replacement water activity, we have to, as industries and all the dischargers, show progress in minimizing our discharges and show a time schedule to meet 10 and 35 years or less. So it was a big swap, if you will. Took a lot of negotiation. There was a lot of pushback from the activist community about not doing that. They wanted those tools, those enforcement tools, they used immediately. And we were able to convince the state board and regional board to allow us to do this approach. So you can see the three goals, as I described a bit, safe drinking water when nitrate exceeds drinking water standards, reduce those impacts to water supply. And long-term, which is where the GSA activities will help, is restore groundwater quality. Because with nitrate, we know the only way to clean the contaminated groundwater basins is dilution. There's no practical, economical treatment that could ever be done in the basins that are so enormous with such high levels of nitrate that we could ever clean it up other than diluting it or in part pumping the water out and using it on our crops to fertilize, essentially. But that process, there was some modeling done with CV salts that showed we could stop ag, we could stop having cities here, which won't happen. And in 100 years, there would barely be a movement of the needle in diluting the nitrates that are in the groundwater in these basins. Okay, next slide. So as part of the process of developing the basin plan amendment, we had to go through a massive data analysis of all the groundwater data that was available for the last 10 years, some areas 15 years. And we identified the highest, the worst of the worst, if you will, the highest contaminated groundwater basins. And these are DWR designated groundwater basins that you see on the map. And the worst 6, the top priorities were Modesto, Turlock, Chowchilla, Kings, which is Fresno area, Cahuilla, which is run by Celia, and Tule, which is down by Porterville. So these were named as the priority watersheds, and we all got, the organizations got a notice to comply for the regional board to begin the process of either forming a management zone or the dischargers could select another path that calls pathway A, where they could prove their discharges are not going to be causing or contributing, and that they would make whole anybody's well that was contaminated with nitrate. We've had 2 cities, Turlock and Fresno, that have taken that pathway. They have not had their plans approved yet, but all the rest of the cities, irrigated ag areas and such, took the management zone approach. Okay, next slide. So Valley Water was formed, Valley Water Collaborative was created as a nonprofit 501c3 organization to represent the dischargers in the area. We're based in Modesto, and you can see our mission there is to implement the programs to provide access to safe drinking water, and then protect and enhance the quality of groundwater used for drinking water. So next slide. So our board of directors is representative of the dischargers in the region. We have 12 board members coming out of the 2 county or the 2 basins, and then the city municipalities you see listed on the right. As I mentioned, all of them are part, all of the cities in our area except Turlock are participating, and then irrigated ag is the East San Joaquin Coalition. Dairy is the Central Valley Regional Monitoring Program, and quite a few of the individual dairies, the poultry industry, and 3 cities that are on the board itself. We have David Bell with Foster Farms that's on the board for the poultry industry. Next slide. So as part of the first plan that was required, it was called a preliminary management zone proposal. Our consultants, which are Ludor Stelmanini and GEI Consulting Engineers, had to go out and map the areas with nitrate and then use available data to determine how many domestic wells were located in these areas that were 10 and above, 10 milligrams per liter nitrate above, and in the close to exceeding level 7.5. We came up with about 2,700 wells. It's not an exact confirmed, but we estimated there's about 2,700 wells that are in these high or close to being high groundwater basin areas. Next slide. So we've been in business now for almost 2 years, a little over 2 years now. We've had over 1,000 applications to the program, and you see circled here. We sent 566 applicants, residences to GI Analytical, our lab out of Turlock, to perform the well sampling, and we have now 437 residences receiving bottled water every month, some twice a month, in the amounts needed to fulfill the residences' needs. So we still have some pending applicants when a tenant applies. We ask that the landowner sign an agreement or sign an acknowledgement that they have, that they are going to be receiving bottled water. One of the barriers that we found to the program is that because it's a water board program, all the well results have to be posted on GeoTracker. And there's a lot of people that don't want their data on a state public database. So we have had more, probably the greatest reason that people, once they learn about it, say, no thanks, I don't want my data on a website, a public website. And it doesn't include their name, but it does include a dot on a map and the residence's address. So that's been a huge barrier. We told the regional board about it. They want the data. The other large, fairly large, almost 200 people that have applied are from cities that are already in public water systems, so their water's fine. Not like the taste of it, but it is clean and it doesn't have nitrates in it. So this is our data as of now. Next slide. So one of the things that we did on a slide a little bit later, and I'll explain this, is that let's see, this has our exceedance. So this just gives you an idea of the type, the amount of exceedances that we have had. About 70%, a little less than 70% are above the drinking water standard. And we track the 7.5 to 10 because we go back a year after the initial sample and resample the well. We've done most of the wells once already, or twice now, and about half have gone up and about half have gone down. So there's no clear trend as to whether that wet winter, particularly the ones we've done this year, have had a substantial impact to the amount of nitrate in the water. One thing to note, though, is that this is not representative of the basin from the standpoint of a scientific geospatial monitoring program. This is wells that we know are in the high nitrate area. We focus efforts where there's high nitrate. So we are finding, the 70% are high. But there's the other flip side, if there's 30% that are over the top. So this just gives you an idea of the data collecting. Okay, next slide. So about a year ago, the State Water Board came to our organization, or actually came to the management zones and said, we have a grant program, SAFER, that we would like to supplement your program to add additional constituents to your sampling regime. They committed to paying for all the additional sampling and analysis, which is considerable, and to cover half of our outreach costs, all program outreach, and a percentage of our administration. And you can see on that first bullet point, we're looking for arsenic, 123 TCP, uranium. We also do EBCP and EEB as well. And if you go to the next slide, give you an idea, the majority, almost the majority, half of the wells have uranium at certain levels in our testing. 123 TCPs next, followed by arsenic. And what we have found out from a treatment standpoint is that 123 TCP needs a carbon filter, whereas uranium and arsenic can be handled by a reverse osmosis system. The dangers with TCP is that it's an inhalant hazard. When hot water vaporizes, it can cause an inhalant risk for people. And we have not found any EBCP or EDB in our samples. So that's somewhat surprising or correct. Okay, next slide. So we have learned a lot in the last 2 years. How do you get a person with an individual well to apply to our program? Second to pulling teeth, it's very difficult. It is just, we have had so much difficulty. We've only found that postcards in the mail, followed by somebody that actually responds, telling their friend or their neighbor, it's okay, it's really a good program. So our two top ways of getting applicants is the postcard and the neighbor friend or family member referring. And I'm going to come back to that. That's an important point. And I know John Holland from way back doing articles in the Modesto Bee. He was very helpful getting stories in the Modesto Bee and the Turlock Journal and Series Enterprise, I think it's called. We've had some pretty good coverage of our program. The SAFER rollout that gave us considerable bumps in our applications. But we spent a lot of money on radio, on canvassing, on flyering, and we're not getting very many responses. And this is based on a survey that an applicant will fill out when they apply for our program. So you can see the percentages that 31% comes from friend, or over 50% of from the postcards and neighbor, friend, family member. Okay, next slide. So there's an example of our postcard mailed over 23,000. We're pestering our 3,000 list. We actually have a list of 5,000 that's in the surrounding area. We've mailed 5 times now, and we continue to get a bump in applications when we send them out. We have a self-mailer now. They can say, leave me alone, don't apply, or don't send us postcards, and we've only got less than 5 back from people. Next slide. So now what we're doing for our program is we've decided to direct our resources to paying our existing recipients $50 per referral. So we're going to try that out, see if we can incentivize our fans, if you will. We have 400 and some water recipients. So we're budgeting for the next 2 months to give a maximum of 10 applicants. So $500, they could, if they find 10 people, they could get 5. No, it's more than that. I'm terrible with that. But anyway, we're going to pay them to get people to apply to the program. We did some PSA advertising on Spanish radio. We spent over $5,000. We got 4 applicants. So we're just, PSAs are not free typically unless you want them to run it 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. Plus, we still table, we still do flyers and such to make sure that our message gets out. Next slide. Oh, by the way, I'll mention too, we canvassed 1,000 households around this Modesto, Ceres, Turlock, and we talked to about 400 people. We got 15 applicants, and we spent a lot of money. We had staff doing canvassing for probably 7 months, 3-4 days a week. And we hardly got any applicants out of that. And that was a lot of staff time. 2 people, Spanish speaker, English speaker, knocking on doors. Only 1 dog died, so that was good. It wasn't a serious dog bite. A lot of friendly dogs, but it was, we learned a lot. We learned that people do not want to be bothered in their homes. A lot of people just said no thank you without even hardly listening more than a minute to our staff talking to them. All right, so the next step of our program is huge. It's called the Management Implementation Plan. We are writing it right now, September 6th. Go to the next slide. So essentially what it says is, how are you going to prepare and enact long-term solutions to the drinking water problem? So because our area is so huge, the 2 basins, we put forward initial focus areas, which are disadvantaged communities, areas that we know we have high nitrates, areas where we have people getting drinking water, where we tested their wells. You can see them highlighted here. This is the Turlock sub-basin. And the next slide has the Modesto Basin. So it's not that we're going to ignore the other areas, but we want to focus in on the highest priority areas. We don't say priority, initial focus area. It's just where we're going to start our efforts. So next slide. So we've created lots of charts for this map. It's complicated here. This is an overview of the outreach engagement. How we're going to be directing efforts to our initial focus areas and then the other management zone areas. And I'll zoom in, go to the next slide. So what we have is all these potential options that I'll go through in a minute for replacement water that are beyond bottled water. And through this effort, we're going to be doing significant outreach, workshops, public meetings, roundtable, big surveys, online surveys, phone surveys. So one of the requirements in the regional board order is you've got to get public input, local public input on what these solutions are. So starting in October, we are going to be rolling out an intensive outreach effort into those initial priority areas. Next slide. And so the options, potential solutions that are going to be out there will be covered Also, we're gonna need to look at the initial focus area, what projects are going on. Is there any feasibility analysis? Is there any potential solutions that will work? And then select and implement those. That's probably 5 years described right in this little flow chart. So it's going to be a lot of work. And then, of course, looking for funding from SAFER and other state funding sources. And then we have hired CB Salts, the group representing all the management zones, has hired lobbyists for Sacramento and Washington to start finding where are these funding sources for this rural development type project. So we're putting serious investment in the Central Valley to try to get access to some real funds to come up with these solutions. And the next slide. So potential solutions. So things, this is in our report that we're submitting. So we have to outline and identify what are these long-term solutions, either non-treatment, non-traditional, or interim. Interim being POU, POE, point of use, point of entry, refill stations. Some long-term solutions are going to be with the interim, or we may need, in some areas, it may not be practical to do anything but a hauled in bottled water to the residents, or a public point of use system. The other high on the list, at least of the state, is consolidation. Try to find these homes that are very close to a public water system and connect them to the water system. Of course, we got to start with this system itself to make sure that they're willing, that they have the capacity, that the engineering is going to work to do that. So that's a viable step. It's a difficult step as well. I think the going rate now for a 4-inch pipe is about $1.5 million a mile. So it's not an inexpensive solution. And then there's also, we're looking at some of these non-traditional water supplying, what you call them, technologies. We have 4 pilot projects with a system that takes water out of the humidity, condenses it into drinking water. And the system's working. There's still some bugs to work out, but we have 4 families that are getting water out of the humidity in the air around their neighborhood, around and surrounding their house, and it produces clean water. And it has a filtration that takes out any of the air contaminants. So that might be something that's a long-term solution for certain installations, for certain residential locations. Okay, next slide. And then I covered these. Let's go right through these. This is the interim solution, bottled water. The next slide is the non-treatment, that consolidation, optimizing systems, maybe little small water systems are created, looking for alternative sources, deeper wells, other things. Next slide. And then there's these new treatment technologies, none of which really look that practical at this moment. I mean, they're working on them, but they're not shelf ready to install, at least from the work we've done so far. Next slide. And then the non-traditional is mentioned here as well. Okay, next slide. So we're starting a public comment period in October, and any way that we can share resources as far as publicizing, helping us out. If there's any mutual interest in these community meetings that we may combine efforts and talk about GSA work, and then ours, anything to attract the same audience I think that you all are looking for on comments about your program. And then we'll be hosting meetings ourselves. And I'm the dog and pony right now. We're looking to hire another person to go around and give this presentation wherever they will let us in the door. So that's my update and presentation.
Thank you very much.
There's all of our contact information. And Eric, the document I emailed you, if there's a way for you all to consider that, I think at some point we're gonna need to formalize arrangements with GSAs. And I'll just hit, if I've got a minute, I will highlight, if I saw a battery left. some of the key points, and you talked about monitoring. If there's cost sharing arrangement for monitoring of groundwater, information sharing, data sharing, community engagement requirements, implementation plans that maybe have mutual goals, share coordinated communication, and coordination or implementation projects. So it's kind of unknown in both. As you can see, our plan going in is very preliminary, but if we have a majority of the same supporters. Irrigated agriculture is, they're paying 55% of our budget. They're paying a large part of your budget and will be in the future. So we are always asked, why didn't you combine with the GSA? Why did you form a new organization? And when we did a kind of round robin, there was the GSA says, what are you kidding me? We have so much to do in the GSAs that we just decided it was best to keep separate at this point. Because you have a lot to do, as do we, from our parent regulatory authorities. So anyway, we'll try to coordinate as best we can and do the best we can with our growers' money.
Definitely. Yeah. And part of the GSP, and we report on water quality, and we have to make sure that what our management actions don't, affect water quality and move plumes, things like that. So we need to coordinate.
Right.
We're not directly responsible for water quality, but we do need to coordinate. It's required through SGMA. So we certainly want to do that moving forward. And this is a good opportunity I'm glad you came and talked to us, because it's a good opportunity to educate some of our people here. We've got some people on the phone that hopefully got some information out of that they didn't know already. So I did, certainly. So
Any way to open the door for rural residences with wells.
Yep.
That's our challenge, because we have to do 100% of the wells. And we're mandated to have some communication and either acknowledgement or otherwise that they don't want our well tested, or they do. I mean, their state regional board is not going to be satisfied with 45% responses. Unfortunately, that's the way it works.
Perry, what kind of feedback have you received from landowners and tenants about doing their own testing? Like when you go to a door or talk to them, have you received any information indicating that they would rather just do that testing themselves rather than being the dot on the water board's database?
You
Is
know,
it happening, do you think?
we don't query them directly on that. But we have had a fair number of folks that have had their wells tested years past that we reach out to them because we need it for our program.
you can grab your mic, Terry.
Oh, yeah,
Perry,
sorry.
sorry.
Yeah.
And then your mic's
we
off.
don't directly ask that question, but we have had a number of people that have tested before that we retest. But as far as that sharing the data on the website, we're open to still convince regional board we don't need to do that. We had another program that my organization, another one I worked on the Central Coast, and we were able to give a lap long of an intersection nearby, so that there was the data people don't like a bunch of dots in one spot. That doesn't work in modeling, but for public relations over time, I don't know how we're going to get around that. Those people did absolutely refuse, and they refuse because they're concerned about the property values. You would imagine if you want to sell the house, or who knows. Even the name Geo Tracker is moderately scary. What's it tracking? And there's just a lot of concern about the government involvement in the program. And we aren't the government, but we're implementing a government program. A lot of people don't like that. I mean, they ask that early on most of the time. It's just a state program, and we of course have to say yes. It's mandated by the state, so yeah, it's kind of tough. And I might mention too, we just created 2 videos, a 3-minute YouTube one, and then a longer 14-minute for explaining CPs. Also share the links with you, Eric, and you can send them to the group if you're interested in watching them. So it gives a good overview of how we got here.
Absolutely. Any other comments, questions from the member agencies? Okay, any comments, questions for Perry from the public? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. Thanks for your time too, and we'll have to keep in touch.
Yeah, however we can work that agreement or edit it or change it to work, that we're open for that.
Okay, check it out.
All right.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, so all we have left is, so item number 8 is just our next meeting, our next regularly scheduled meeting will be September 13th at 1:30. So we'll have a Zoom option, then it'll be offered here in person at Oakdale Irrigation Districts. Questions, comments on that? No?
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming. Questions, comments from the public on the next meeting? Okay. Number 9 is just items too late for the agenda. Any comments, items too late for the agenda?
I got a couple things.
Yep.
Kind of on what you just ended on. So
Okay.
there is interest from inside MID to perhaps begin exploring rotating meeting locations. So
Okay.
that's something that others
Yeah.
are open to, and certainly not just MID, if other entities as well. So
Okay.
So that's one, plant that
Yeah,
one.
absolutely.
Number 2, at least at MID, the latest list we have for members and alternates is from 2018. Obviously, there's been a lot of change since then.
Yeah, I know there's been some emails sent around, so
Okay.
maybe just the list wasn't officially updated.
Yeah, so I guess looking to make that list officially updated. And then number 3, Mr. Lyons kind of stole some of my thunder, but yesterday the MID board set the price per acre foot and approved the form agreement for the MID groundwater replenishment plan. More details will certainly come. I believe we are going to be posting the application and information on Monday, the 14th. So that is coming. That's it for me.
Great. Glad to hear about the out of district or area agreement moving forward. That's a good thing. That's positive for the basin. So anything else? No? All right. We'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.